Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Moving on now to the All-NBA selections that were announced yesterday. We have a handful of things to dive into. So just starting out here, first team, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Nikola Jokic. All pretty straightforward in my eyes. I think that first off, SGA and Jokic, both unanimous first-team selections. No surprise about that. Luka Doncic was one vote off of the unanimous status. He had 98 first-team votes, but one second-team vote. So, not really sure what the case for that is. I'm curious if we'll get any answers on that. But those were all no-brainers. Now, Jason Tatum and Giannis, I think, are both deserving. They are who were on my selections headed into this whole process. But the love for Jalen Brunson that had built up during the final month or so of the season did make it at least somewhat of a debate. Ultimately, when you look at the voting, Jalen Brunson, well, if you look at the closest to, because as much as there were a handful of people that were sort of calling for Giannis to not make the first team, he was dealing with the injury down the stretch of the season. The Bucks were an underperforming team based off of expectations coming into the year, but I have no doubt in mind with the level of efficiency and effectiveness that Giannis played this season, I had no problem whatsoever. I really didn't think it was that much of a question, but there is a case to be made for Jalen Brunson over Jason Tatum. Ultimately, Tatum got 427 points in the voting format that they do. Jalen Brunson had 368. So ultimately, it wasn't all that close. Tatum had 28 more first team votes, and I've already talked to a handful of Knicks fans in my life about this idea. Our host here at the GSMC Sports Network, Nelson, who runs the basketball podcast, he immediately reached out to me and one of my other Knicks friends as well. And my case is, I do think that the criteria for All-NBA is slightly different than MVP, because Jalen Brunson, based off of the surrounding factors and the, again, sort of a little bit of the idea of expectations, he was a bigger storyline 1000% than Jason Tatum, and he played extremely well to the point where he rightfully had more MVP votes than Jason Tatum did. But I think that All-NBA is just slightly different, where it sort of takes in the bigger picture of the season. Are you the best player? And for Tatum, being the best player on a 64-win Celtics team that was top 3 all-time in point differential, and there being no other All-NBA selections from the Celtics, I think that it's really silly to get up in arms, I think, anyways, about the idea of what your placement is on All-NBA. But, again, I think that especially sort of taking in the full circumstances surrounding both of these players, I personally just feel like Jason Tatum was very rightfully deserving of that first team spot, and Brunson, if he made it, I don't think it would have been an atrocity by any means, but I fully defend the voters who decided to go Tatum over him. But let me know in the comments section, because I know that is definitely a point of contention for a lot of people. But Brunson was joined on that second team by Anthony Edwards, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, and Anthony Davis. I feel like, and we've talked about this at length already when talking about the other awards that have come out. The fact that it comes out all this much later after the regular season just sort of skews in these other postseason narratives that come into play. I do think that Kawhi Leonard was deserving of All-NBA second team specifically as well, but because of the fact that he wasn't able to go in the postseason, I think a lot of people are a lot more down on him. But he was tremendous through the first half of the season. He wasn't bad in the second half of the season, but we were seeing efficiency levels from Kawhi that we've really never seen other than maybe the 2019 Toronto season. But I had no problems with the second team generally. Third team was LeBron James, Steph Curry, Domantas Sabonis, Tyrese Halliburton, and Devin Booker. Now, this is where, again, you get to the bottom of the list. That's where the debates really start to come in a little bit more. Ultimately, I can't be all that mad with the voting as a whole. Now, I did, and possibly it's my Celtics bias, I acknowledge that, but I don't know necessarily if I would have considered Tyrese Halliburton to be an All-NBA player this year because of how much he struggled in the second half of the season. Now, he was really impactful in that first half of the year, and ultimately we're seeing, some of the highs of his postseason as well. So I don't think that this is also any situation where it is this massive misjustice, but I don't know. I wouldn't have put Tyrese Halliburton on my ballot. I did not. But he actually wasn't even the lowest total in votes for players that made it. Devin Booker actually had less votes than him, which I can also understand a little bit. But I sort of defend Devin Booker. The Suns season, as much as, again, they were, a 6 seed, wasn't all that impressive necessarily from a regular season standpoint if you look at the standings alone, but they still won 49 or so games during the regular season. Devin Booker took on an enhanced role as their sort of de facto point guard, so I sort of stand by this one as well. But Jaylen Brown having the type of season he did and doing so with a huge improvement on the defensive side of the ball, where he got some votes as well for All-NBA defensive team, I probably would have leaned with a guy in Jaylen Brown who was tremendous defensively, had his most efficient year of his career while still averaging 23 points per game, and like I mentioned, that defense, but ultimately, again, it's not that big of a deal. And also Tyrese Halliburton, Jaylen Brown got the All-NBA selection when he needed it to get the Supermax contract. Now Tyrese Halliburton gets that as well. So ultimately, we are pro players getting paid on this podcast. So again, don't think it's anything to be overly upset with. But one thing that I did think was incredibly interesting was the Domantas Sabonis love from this one individual voter. You have to imagine it's just him. And listen, Sabonis made third team. I have absolutely no problems with it. I think that a lot of people are forgetting how good he was this season. But some of the love is ridiculous, where there seems to be this one voter who was all in on Sabonis, voted him first team All-NBA. This is a team that missed the playoffs. First team all defense, and had him on the ballot for MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. I think that's just crazy to me, especially some of the defense accolades with this, because as much as I like Sabonis, I understand that rebounding is a part of defense, but at the same time, definitely not who I would try and build around from a post-player perspective if I'm trying to build a juggernaut of a defense. But just thought that was something that was pretty funny to note on. But some of the contract ramifications, like I mentioned, Tyrese Halliburton makes the All-NBA team, headed into his offseason where he's eligible for a contract extension. He and Anthony Edwards are both on this same boat, so they are eligible for contracts that are 30% above the standard max value with their selections to these All-NBA teams. Now, we don't know exactly what the number is yet. The salary caps for next season will not be decided until July, but the projections are that it's going to be around $245 million. So, some quick math there. If we're talking a 5-year deal, that's about $49 million per year. Probably more than that, because I think the salary is going to jump maybe slightly more than some of the initial projections. But it's a lot of money for these players, but they are fully deserving of it, and I do sort of stand by, again, their selections. Tyrese Halliburton was a little bit more questionable, but ultimately I think that you can't complain all too much. And then the last couple interesting notes on the financial implications of these selections is Luka Doncic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who both are not actually available or eligible, I should say, for extensions until next offseason. But with these selections, also, by the way, Luka, and I should have mentioned this at the top, 5 all first team selections in the first 6 seasons of his career. Just unbelievable. And that's where, granted, I want to put it out there that I haven't read the full article just yet, but The Ringer ranking him 4th on the top 25 players under 25, and the fact that Luka Doncic was not even in the top 3 is heinous to me. But I'm going to do some more research on that list and probably put together one of my own, so definitely stay tuned in the coming, maybe tomorrow, maybe early next week for that. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as well, where he can get paid big time money, where it seems like he could hit $80 million at one point throughout the course of his career by the 2030-2031 season because of making this All-NBA team, which is just absolutely ridiculous for the most part. You know, the NBA is headed in a direction where it just makes tons of money, and I saw some people on social media talking about it's already stupid that NBA players make all this much money, but I also sort of argue on the other end that it is better than these owners just being able to sit on all of the money by themselves. But let me know what your thoughts were on these All-NBA selections. Final note here, actually, before we head into the next break, is Bam Adebayo was somebody who could have also earned a Supermax extension if he had made an All-NBA team this year, but he didn't ultimately come that close. 1 second place vote, 4 third place votes, but you know, Bam Adebayo is somebody who probably gets a little bit disrespected, I think, generally in terms of NBA fandom, but I also don't know who he would have made it over. He had a great season, but I think that the lack of, success for the Heat during the regular season this year, it's not like Bam had any, real dominant offense going for him. Now he makes All-NBA first team, all defense. So he got some recognition there, but unfortunately for him, isn't going to get financially rewarded for it quite the same. But that is all we have on that subject. We are going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, going to be talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers firing their head coach JB Bickerstaff and why that may be a mistake for them. So stick with us, and we will be right back.